Well, welcome to this recording on this May long weekend. I really hope and trust that you're finding some ways to just enjoy the weekend. We're experiencing some beautiful weather this weekend in Summerland and in the Okanagan. Finding safe ways and fun ways to connect with some family and friends and to just make the most of this weekend as best as we can under the restrictions that are in place. So just thank you for watching this and for taking the time to see this video. But also just to welcome you to the story of Moses. Today we are looking at part 1, and the theme for this message today is the theme of deliverance. And it's coming from the first 4 chapters of Exodus. Exodus being the second book of the Bible. There's Genesis, which we have now finished. Genesis, the story of Joseph and Jacob. We finished with those characters and others in Genesis, now moving to the story of Moses in Exodus. So today, the first 4 chapters. If you have your Bible handy, well, you're welcome to just go ahead and pick it up and turn to Exodus chapter 1. If you use a Bible app, go ahead and open up your device and the same thing. Now, we're not going to read all 4 chapters, but we are going to make reference to the events that are highlighted in those 4 chapters. So you can just follow along. And I would encourage you that when you have a moment to just go ahead and read those 4 chapters. There's a lot that is packed into the first 4 chapters of the book of Exodus. Now, a while ago, I took a class, and in that class, we were invited to just share the story of our lives using poster board and Post-it notes. Those are sticky notes. They come in different colors and in different sizes. So we were to create a timeline and use different colors and different sizes to create categories, and then underneath those categories, list significant events that happened in our lives. Now, that timeline is long gone. I no longer have it. I've actually used the exercise for something else. But I didn't keep it, and I'm not really an artist. If you're ever playing Pictionary, I would advise you to choose someone else who is a better artist, because I've left people scratching their head when it comes to things that I've drawn. So I have not drawn a timeline of my life. But I have put together a timeline of some of the significant things that have happened in my life. Going to share that with you, and then share with you some of the events in Moses' life in those first 4 chapters. So I hope that you're able to see this. It's kind of small, but I'm going to hold this right up to the camera. And we're going to begin right here with this line, a very significant moment in my life, even though I have absolutely no recollection of that day. But I'm told that in September of 1956, well, that's when I arrived on planet Earth. So I was born September of 1956. This next line is significant. Again, not significant then, but it became very significant to me later, still is to this day. In 1957, 1 year and 20 days after I was born, my brother was born. Now, what happened is that about a month later after he was born, he passed away. He came down with spinal meningitis, and he was misdiagnosed. So it was a very sad and a really tough time for my parents. I really don't have any recollection of him. I remember his name, and I know the cemetery where he was buried. That's really all that I know of him. Now, what became significant, one part of it, is that when our first son was born, we named Randy after my brother. So that happened in 1957. Now, in 1971, we'll move to this line. That's when we moved from Issaquah to Colville. Now, what was significant about that is that we moved from a larger community to a smaller community, and that just gave me an opportunity to be involved in some activities that I probably never would have excelled at or found that I was pretty good at. One of those being basketball. I discovered that I had a pretty good talent for playing basketball, which gave me a lot of confidence throughout my life. So that was in 1971 that we moved. And then this line in 1974 is when I graduated from high school. And in September, I started attending Canadian Bible College in Regina, Saskatchewan. Now this line, a huge line in my life, in 1976, that's when I met Jan at Canadian Bible College. In 1977, Jan and I were engaged, and then in 1978, we were married. But also, in 1978, we were married in June of that year, and then we began ministry in Morden, Manitoba. In 1979, that's when our first son was born. Randy arrived when we were in Morden, Manitoba. In 1980, we moved to Strasbourg, Saskatchewan, and another significant event, that's when Brian was born. Brian came into our family when we were in Strasbourg. He was born in Regina, so we added him to the family in 1982. Then, in 1985, we moved to Vancouver, where I was a part of the staff at 10th Avenue Alliance. We were in Vancouver for 2 years, but in 1985, another great event happened in our lives, and that's when our daughter Jennifer was born, which made our family complete. We had Randy, Brian, and Jennifer. In 1987, we moved to Brampton, Ontario, where Jan and I church planted for 6 years. We started a brand new church called Brampton West. And in 1993, we moved from Brampton, Ontario to Peterborough, where we lived and ministered for 4 years. And then in 1997, we left Peterborough and drove to Summerland, where we continue to live to this day. So that's just a little bit of my timeline and what were some of the significant events in my life. Now, to move to the timeline of Moses, you'll see up here that this is Moses from Exodus chapter 1 to Exodus chapter 4. Not all of it is about Moses, but it gives us some context for what was happening. In 1805 BC, we find right here at the beginning of this timeline that Joseph passed away. Now, Joseph and his brothers and an entire generation all passed away. So we have that happening in Exodus chapter 1. We also discover that there is a new king that comes to the throne in Egypt, a new Pharaoh. And this new Pharaoh did not know Joseph. He had no knowledge of him whatsoever and all of the great things that Joseph did. And so in that one generation, everything changed. We'll talk more about that later. But this new Pharaoh was insecure, he was ruthless, and he wanted to control this growing nation of people called Israel. So what did he do? But he made them slaves to Egypt. He saw them as a threat to Egypt's global position and to their national security. So he made them slaves. Now also, we discover in Exodus chapter 1 that this new king issues a public health order. And in that public health order, he decrees that all Hebrew babies are to be killed. All Hebrew baby boys are to be killed. And you know, if you fast forward to the birth of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, you'll discover in Matthew chapter 2 that a similar ruler by the name of Herod issued a similar public health order. And that was that all boys 2 years of age and under who were born in and around Bethlehem were to be killed. Now let me just stop for a moment here and just make a comment about public health orders, since we hear so much about public health orders in our day. Now, when I'm talking about a public health order from Exodus chapter 1 or Matthew chapter 2, I just want to be very clear here that we're talking about public health orders that were pure evil. The order by Pharaoh and the order by Herod in Matthew chapter 2 was to commit murder. I mean, it was infanticide. There was the killing of babies that was being decreed. There was a complete and total disregard for life. Now, when we talk about public health orders today, we're not talking about an order to kill babies. And you know, we're not being told who we are to worship, nor are we being told that we can't assemble to worship. We can gather for worship. We just can't gather in the same way that we're used to or accustomed to. And you know, That could change. As we are aware in BC, there's going to be another announcement on Tuesday, and the restrictions that we're under now could change, and so we're waiting for the next announcement. Now, I know that you might have different views about public health orders than I do, and that's okay. We have a right to hold different views. And I would hope that if we disagree about our view on public health orders, that we can have an honest and open and respectful, a civil conversation about those disagreements. So just to make that comment about public health orders. Okay, now coming back to the story of Moses, this comes now to where Moses actually occurs on the scene. We find out in Exodus chapter 2 that it happens in 1526 BC, according to some scholars, that's when Moses was born. 1526 BC. So 1805 BC is when Joseph dies, his brothers die, and we find this whole generation disappears. They all die. So from 1805, then 1526, Moses is born. So Moses is born into slavery. Now, he's born to parents of the tribe of Levi, okay? And his mom sees him as a special baby. Now, I think you're thinking what I'm thinking, right? That what mom wouldn't see their baby as a special baby? But just because of the circumstances of Moses' life, maybe there was something that even perhaps the Spirit of God just whispered into her that God had something special in mind for Moses. So she hides Moses for 3 months, and then she puts him into a basket and floats him into the Nile River and kind of pushes it towards some reeds. So Moses is in a basket in the Nile River. One of Pharaoh's daughters comes to bathe and discovers this baby in a basket, then goes looking for someone to nurse this baby. Who does she find to nurse this baby but Moses' mother? Her name is Jochebed. We'll say more about that later. But she is the one then that is hired. She actually gets paid to nurse her baby, this baby that is supposed to be killed, okay? So she nurses this baby. When she's finished nursing Moses, then she returns Moses to the palace. And Moses is raised in Pharaoh's palace. Now, about 40 years later, over to this line right here, Moses sees an Egyptian abusing one of his fellow countrymen. And Moses takes exception. And he kills the Egyptian and hides his body in the sand. When that is discovered, he flees to Midian, which is a huge significant moment in his life, because he winds up settling in the home of Reuel, who's also known as Jethro, who becomes his father-in-law. Jethro gives to Moses one of his daughters by the name of Zipporah, and they have 2 sons who are born to them. So Jethro becomes a great mentor and influence in Moses' life. In Exodus chapter 3, Moses is out in the desert. He's looking after Jethro's flocks. And while he is there, he sees this bush that is on fire. It's the story of the burning bush. You can read all about it in Exodus chapter 3. And that's where God reveals his name to Moses. And what is that name? It's the name I am who I am. It is so significant. Just want to take a moment and unpack this. I am who I am means that God is self-existent. He has his being of himself. He's not dependent on anyone else or anything else. He's independent of everything. He's self-existent. He is self-sufficient. Therefore, he is all-sufficient. He's the inexhaustible fountain of being and blessedness. He's eternal. He's unchangeable. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And in 2021, and even thinking back to 2020, in the midst of this whole pandemic and everything that we've been experiencing, It is so wonderful and so comforting to be reminded of something that doesn't change. We face changing messages and changing science and changing discoveries all the time, but there is someone that you can always rely on who is always faithful and always true and always trustworthy. He is God 100%. He's 100% God 100% of the time. He does not change. He doesn't shift from one thing to the other. He's not one thing yesterday and something different today. He is consistent and he is always the same. You find in John chapter 7, in the Gospel of John, you find seven references to his name, I am. You find in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. He also says, I am the light of the world. Then he says, I am the door, and I am the good shepherd. He goes on to say in John chapter 11, I am the resurrection and the life. And then he goes on to say that I am the way and the truth and the life. And then he says in John chapter 15, I am the true vine. And if you go to the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation, it was written by John, you find I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am the one who was, I am the one who is, who always was, and who is still to come. In other words, I am the God of yesterday, I am the God of today, and I am the God of tomorrow. I am the God of the beginning, I'm the God of the end, and I am the God of everything in between. I am the first and the last, the beginning and the end, and everything in between. I am who I am. That is someone that we can always rely on. And you'll read about this whole encounter that God has with Moses there in the desert in Exodus chapter 3. By the way, I am is the unpronounceable eternal name for God. Unpronounceable because if you read about what scholars have found about his name, and what Jews would think about this name, it's so sacred to them that they won't even try to pronounce it. You can spell it YHWH. We would pronounce it as Yahweh, YHWH. But this is the unpronounceable, eternal name for God. I am who I am. Now, just to come back to the lifeline and the story of Moses, to come to Exodus chapter 4, you find that Moses then, he goes to Jethro. God wants Moses to go back to Egypt and to lead his people. So Moses goes to Jethro. He gets permission to return to Egypt and to go back to his people. So this is about 40 years later. So Moses is about 80 when all of this is taking place. And you can read about this in Exodus chapter 4. Now, there are some significant things that are happening in this whole encounter with Moses and God at the burning bush, and it carries over into Exodus chapter 4. I mean, you have this whole back and forth. God is trying to say to Moses, Moses, I want you to do this, and I'm going to empower you to do this. And Moses is saying, I am not the one. I am not your guy. He keeps coming up with reasons as to why he should not be the one to go to his people and then to confront Pharaoh and to ask for Pharaoh to set God's people free, to set the nation of Israel free. So finally, God becomes angry with Moses. Now, you find here that there are even some signs and wonders that are performed to help bolster Moses' confidence that this is, I am who I am, and that God will be faithful to supply all that Moses needs. But Moses actually winds up telling God he's not eloquent, he can't speak, so God actually winds up assigning Aaron, Moses' brother, to be his assistant and to be his mouthpiece for him, okay? So you have this whole scene that is working out in Exodus 3 and Exodus 4. Now, something else that happens as Moses and Zipporah, along with their two boys, are going back to Egypt, God almost kills Moses. Why? Because Moses has not circumcised one of his boys. Now, there's any number of reasons for this, But what happens is that Zipporah, Moses' wife, actually then takes a flint and circumcises the son. So then God is appeased, and he's not angry with Moses. If you go all the way back to Genesis 17, you'll find that God says to Abraham that all males are to be circumcised. That's part of the covenant or the agreement, the contract between God's people and God. All males are to be circumcised. And in Genesis 21, Abraham circumcises Isaac. Okay? So Moses didn't do this. And God is angry with Moses. But Zipporah steps in, she intervenes, and the son is circumcised, and everything is fine. And then Moses returns back to Egypt. And then we'll start talking more about everything in part 2. Okay? So that's what is taking place in the life of Moses and in the story of Moses. Now, let me just take a moment and talk about some takeaways from today's lesson. So, just coming back to the events that I have highlighted from chapters 1 to 4, let me just say this first of all. Here's the first takeaway. Things can change very quickly. Things can change very quickly. We understand that, don't we? I mean, what we witnessed from January to March of 2020 was a huge shift in our world. It affected so many levels of society. When COVID came in to existence, when we discovered this virus, okay? Things change quickly. How about in the span of one generation? We find that one generation passes away, a new Pharaoh comes on the throne who has no idea about Joseph and all of the wonderful things that he accomplished. He has no idea, but he sees Joseph's people as a threat. And so he makes them Egypt's slaves. Now, when you think about generations, I know there is some overlap and it's pretty impossible to clearly delineate between generations. But you know, right now there are at least 7 generations that are living. I mean, those born from 1901 to 1927, they're known as the greatest generation. Then you have the silent generation, or the builders. That generation was born from 1928 to 1945. Then you have the baby boomers, who were born from 1946 to 1964. These are generalizations. It's not always that cut and dried. But anyway, you have the greatest generation, the silent generation, or the builders. Then you have the baby boomers, of which I happen to be a part of. Then you have the Gen Xers, who are born from 1965 to 1980. Then you have the millennials, who were born from 1981 to 1997. Now you're talking about our kids, okay? Then you have Gen Z, who were born from 1998 to 2010. Then you have the present generation, which is Generation Alpha, born 2011 to 2025. Now, I know that you can't make all of these clear delineations about these, and there is some overlap. But just think of the changes that each of these generations has experienced. And as you progress closer to the present, change accelerates. As you get closer to 2021, it's amazing how rapidly our world is changing. The events and the pace of life just continue to speed up, and it goes by quicker and quicker. I just feel like there are days when I'm just barely hanging on, if I'm hanging on at all. So when you think about what happens in Exodus chapter 1, the significant changes that occur, where the people of Israel are a revered nation, they're given incredible status, and then all of a sudden, they're seen as a threat, and they're made to be slaves of the very nation in which they've been living, and have had so much freedom and respect, and all of that changes. You see, life under and with Joseph was pretty good for Jacob and his family of 70. And even though Egyptians had no respect for shepherds, Jacob and his family enjoyed all the benefits of food, security, shelter, and the best land Egypt had to offer during the lifetime of the present Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh died, and a new Pharaoh rose to power. And eventually life for this small nation. Remember the promise made to Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as sand on the seashore, as many as stars in the sky. This small nation found themselves at the mercy of an insecure ruler who saw them as a threat and decided to do something about it. And so what did he do? He made them slaves. They went from the penthouse to the outhouse. They went from privilege and luxury, they went from privilege and respect to slaves. And this small nation wasn't so small anymore. And they were now seen as a legitimate threat to Egypt's global position and their national security. And again, you and I have witnessed a staggering amount of change in the blink of an eye. Let me just ask you some questions here. So how do you cope? How are you doing in the midst of all of these changes? What do you do? And who do you turn to? Who is that trusted person that you can rely on? So that is the first takeaway that I think about. It's the speed at which change can happen. Okay? And what do we do about that as we try and navigate all of these messages and all of the things that are happening around us? How are we doing? How are we inwardly? How are we coping? And who are we turning to? Who are we following for our advice? Okay? Here's the second takeaway. Now you have this new king, and then there is Moses that is born into a nation of slaves, okay? Moses arrives. This new king is clearly insecure. He's threatened and he's controlling and he's evil. Okay, so you have these Hebrew midwives who refuse to obey the king's orders. You find all of this in Exodus chapter 1. Why did they refuse to follow the king's orders? Tells us right in the first chapter. They feared God. They feared God. When questioned, the midwives essentially put the onus back on the king. The midwives said to Pharaoh, quote, "The Hebrew women are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly, we can't get there in time." Now, what's interesting, Pharaoh doesn't have any comeback for that. It's because of the hard labor and the great physical shape that these women were in that they were able to have their babies so quickly. Okay? He doesn't have a comeback for that. Now also, we find in Exodus chapter 1 that for sparing the Hebrew boy babies, God rewarded the midwives and he gave them families of their own. So they disobey the king's order and God rewards them for not following what the king has asked them to do. Now, later on, we discover the names for this anonymous couple in Exodus chapter 2, the parents of Moses. We just find that they're from the tribe of Levi, but their names are Amram and Jochebed. And Jochebed won't capitulate to the king's orders either. She hides her baby. Now, the amazing result of all of her efforts is that she winds up being paid to nurse her own son. And only God could arrange such circumstances, right? Now, here's what I want to say in the face of such a public health order, in the face of this disobedience, and what I think is a good approach to health orders today. I just feel like this is important to just share this with you. This is a paper that was produced by our district superintendent of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, the Canadian Pacific District. The title is called "The Pandemic Restrictions and Civil Disobedience, the Canadian Pacific District Position." Our district superintendent, who is just in the process now of retiring, his name is Errol Rempel. Let me just share this because we have this section called "The Heart of the Matter." Listen to this. Love for the other trumps rights for myself. Voluntary self-surrender in the best interest of the other, as modeled by Jesus on the cross, is at the heart of the gospel. Our district superintendent says we stand with Frank Burdo, senior pastor of Living Hope Fellowship in Surrey. He said this, quote, "If I can care for my neighbor by briefly shutting down gatherings in the building and going to online meetings, what a wonderful thing. It's a way of serving my community. How can I love my neighbor? Close the building for a little while. Prevent the spread." End of quote. Now, our district superintendent goes on to say, "We voluntarily and temporarily abstain from in-person worship in our buildings for the sake of the other. for the sake of bending the curve downwards, for the sake of preventing further infections. We are fundamentally motivated by the desire to protect every human life of any age. Each one is created in the image of God and infinitely precious to Jesus. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is not about rights snatched away from us by malevolent authorities. It is about rights freely relinquished for a season. He goes on to say, Dr. Franklin Piles, former president of the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Canada, writes, and I quote, "As I understand it, there was a law or rule in Jesus' time that a Roman soldier would stop anyone and make them carry a burden 1 mile. Note, this was from an oppressive government. What did Jesus say was the proper response? Was it assert your rights? You know what it was. It was carry it 2 miles. This is my take. What we are hearing from people is a spirit of rebellion in defying pandemic restrictions. It is not just a matter of obeying the magistrate who does not carry the sword in vain. It is a matter of bringing the humility and generosity of Jesus into the foreign territory of the world. When we do that, even in a simple thing like wearing a mask or briefly foregoing meeting in person, a space is made for the kingdom to begin to grow, that little seed that sprouts." End of quote. There's more to that paper, but I think that gives us a very balanced and a very well thought through response to public health orders. A question: can we commit to doing the right thing even when the wrong is so clearly wrong and the pressure to do wrong is so strong? I'm now thinking about Exodus 1 and Matthew chapter 2. Can we display the faith of the Hebrew midwives and Amram and Jochebed in the face of that kind of opposition? Do you realize the faith of those midwives and the faith of that? When that kind of evil is put upon society, will you and I be found faithful in our response? Will we do the right thing when we're being told to do the wrong thing? Now, that's why I gave you the balance when we're talking about public health orders. Okay, so just so we keep that in mind. Don't hear what I'm not saying, right? Okay, so that's something good for us to think about. Here's the third takeaway. Moses' reaction to the unjust treatment of one of his fellow countrymen. Moses grew up in privilege and luxury, having the best of everything. I mean, Moses was given the best service, the best education, the best food. Yet when he witnessed the hard labor of his people, and he saw what they were subjected to and the gross mistreatment of a fellow Hebrew, he snapped. Thinking that there was no other option, he killed the Egyptian and hid the body. When his action was revealed, Moses was rightly afraid, because Pharaoh then was looking for Moses and wanted to kill him. And so Moses fled. But even in all of this, God had an amazing plan. What? I mean, we just went through the whole story of Joseph, didn't we? And in the midst of those amazing circumstances, when everything seems to be going wrong, God is at work. And you and I need to put our faith and trust in Him and look to Him. He's at work, even in the midst of what we're experiencing. He hasn't abandoned us. He loves us and He's with us, and His promise is just as true today as it was years and years and years ago. He is with you. He is with us. He will provide and supply everything that we need. We can trust Him. Even in what happens there in that encounter where Moses commits murder and kills this Egyptian. And when he flees and he hides and he runs, God has something amazing in store, because you know what? God will never waste a hurt. Do you believe that? It's true. He will not waste a hurt. You see, God wound up settling Moses in Midian in the home of none other than Reuel, Jethro, who becomes an amazing life skills coach and a spiritual mentor for Moses. Take some time, read about Jethro. He is incredible, and he's just the right person to set up a training course for Moses, who is going to go back to his people and who is going to lead in spite of his reluctance and all of his excuses as to why he can't and why he's not qualified. Listen, is there something that has happened to you that you think God could never use for anything, even remotely good? Has something happened that you think is way beyond God's ability to redeem? Never count out the amazing grace of God. Never count out the power of God to redeem even what seems to us to be the worst circumstance imaginable. Can God take that and make that a part of his plan for your life and mine? Absolutely. Absolutely. I just listened to an interview that Carrie Nieuwhof had with Tim Keller. And Tim Keller has just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And Tim Keller makes the comment that God gave him that cancer. And he said, God gave me 2 words. And here are the words. 1, sanctification. 2, focus. He said, I'm not holy enough. And God is using my illness and this diagnosis to just laser focus my life on him and to bring me into a right relationship with God. I had a walk with God, but now I am really being sanctified. I'm being brought closer to him. And I am more focused. I was going about my routine and doing good things, but now I am laser focused on what God has for me. Never count out the amazing grace and power of God to redeem even the most unimaginable, unthinkable circumstance, the worst thing that we could ever imagine or think of. That God is able to make that a part of his amazing plan for you. That's what he did for Moses. Now here's the 4th and final thing that I want to focus on. Moses goes back to Egypt. He's reluctant, he's resistant, he's fighting all the way. He's dragging his feet. Reminds me of C.S. Lewis, who talked about his conversion to Jesus Christ as one who was being dragged into the kingdom, kicking and screaming. Moses is reluctant, resistant. He is giving God every excuse he can think of. And we could say that his reluctance was due to what we learn about Moses later, because we discover later on in the Bible that we find this comment that Moses was the meekest, most humble man on the whole planet. But I don't think it applies here. I don't think it applies because we find in Exodus chapter 4, verse 14, that God becomes angry with Moses. This is the resistance that goes deeper than just something personal. Okay? Moses is fighting. He's kicking and screaming against God and God's plan for him. Yet once again, we see that God takes humans, as weak as they are and as frail as they are and as broken and struggling. And he does something extraordinary with them. You see, when we are weak, God is strong. His strength is made perfect in weakness. Let this work its way into your soul. In Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 to 26, we find these words. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. Just read it for yourself. Hebrews 11, verses 24 to 26. What about you? And what about me? Is it better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of this world? Is it better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of this world? Ask Moses. He'll tell you. His answer is an unequivocal yes. It is better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of this world. I close with this verse out of Matthew chapter 16, verse 26. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? This is not about my rights. This is not about my life. This is about my life bringing glory to God. That's what this is about. And as you think about all that Moses experienced and all that he went through, it was for God and for God's purposes that Moses experienced everything that he did. And in the end, God is glorified. Let's pray. Oh, Father, would you take all of these thoughts? There's so much here. Take all of these thoughts and work them into our soul, work them into our minds, into our hearts. And would you cause us to respond as you would have us to? Please, Father, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for your presence, and that we can always trust you. For I just pray all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for watching. Next week, part 2.